His family didn't see it coming. Their son, Sunday Young, jumped out of a 12-story window last year and committed suicide. Now, this was after he was tortured at an Apple factory in China. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to be here and speak with you today. My name is Kristen Lamanna, and I'm here to expose the dark side of one of our leading American corporations. Over the past year, I have closely followed the New York Times investigation of Apple's labor practices, and I've come to the conclusion that the government needs to take action. I am here today to convince you that Congress needs to pass the Decent Working Conditions and Fair Competition Act to ensure that Apple, as well as all other American corporations, uphold fair labor practices abroad. So first, I'm going to start by reviewing the problem and explain exactly what these horrible labor conditions really look like. Then, I'm going to explain my proposed act and end by convincing you why it is a superior plan of action to be taken. So, let's start by reviewing the problem. Sunday Young was not Apple's only casualty last year. In Apple's main Chinese factory known as Foxconn, accidents and suicides are a relatively frequent occurrence. According to Apple and Foxconn, a report authored by Jeffrey Kay, over the past 2 years, there have been more than 150 victims. This includes 137 workers poisoned, 17 workers committed suicide, 4 deaths by explosions, and 77 other workers were injured from those explosions. That's too many. After the 11th worker jumped from Foxconn last year, Foxconn installed suicide nets surrounding the entire building. They're still there today. Why are these workers so suicidal, you might ask? Well, maybe it's because they're being paid $5.20, not per hour, but per day. Even the great American Henry Ford specifically paid his workers enough to be able to afford the automobiles that they were producing. But by contrast, most of Apple's factories, the majority, have never even seen a complete iPad. Instead, they're working 11 days straight for 14 hours a day on the same minute part of the product, only then to retire after a hard day's work to Apple's bums, where they pay a portion of that $5.20 to sleep with 7 other workers in these crowded little conditions. This is according to a New York Times posting called Foxconn Technology. Apple has betrayed us. They've hidden their miserable, suicidal workers across the world, but there's a solution. And that solution is passing the Decent Working Conditions and Fair Competition Act. Here in America, we don't allow our workers to be treated like slaves. So why do then we allow our American corporations to pass off these slave-like conditions abroad? Why are we okay with that? Even the Institute for Global Labor and Human Rights points out that American copyrights are protected abroad, yet our workers are not. This act that I'm proposing today would prohibit the import, export, or sale of any goods made of sweatshop labor here in the United States. It refers to any product from any company. It's simple, it's practical, it makes sense. If Congress passes this act, Apple will have to change, and if Apple changes, its workers, like Sunday Young, will be treated fairly in the future. So, I've already reviewed the problem, and I've explained this proposed act and how it would work, but what I haven't yet done yet is I haven't convinced you why this is a superior plan of action to be taken. And this really boils down to 2 main reasons. So the first is really simple, and it has to deal with exactly the problem we've already been discussing, and that is Apple. Congress should pass this act because Apple will not do enough on its own to solve its labor conditions. The free market is not going to solve this problem on its own. And for this, I offer 2 main reasons why. First, according to Jeffrey Hayes in a Huffington Post article called Regulate the Rotten Apples, Apple has gone ahead and admitted there's problems, and it's hired the Fair Labor Association to kind of check up on its working conditions. For all you business people, this is also known as an audit. But precisely because this act was voluntary, when that report comes back, if those results are negative, Apple can just throw it out. They'll hide it, they'll bury it. No one will ever know it. Apple will make sure of that. They'll just order another report. Or fine, let's even say hypothetically that Apple's going to be perfectly honest and ethical with us. according to Peter Stevenson in an article by the Huffington Post called Apple's Factories Violating Chinese Labor Laws, Apple has set standards that its workers cannot work in excess of 60 hours a week. Good move. But the problem with this is that Foxconn over in China has its own Chinese managers. And these managers often don't uphold the same standards that we want them to. Apple can put more and more regulations in place, but they're only going to work if Apple simply refuses to stop importing its iPhones from abroad. And this is simply not going to do unless it's forced to do. And this sums up my first main reason that we should pass this act to ensure that Apple upholds fair labor practices. But the second main reason why we should pass this act is for the much larger implications involved. Congress should pass this act because the stakes of this go far beyond Apple. You may have been surprised here today when I'm talking about Apple's poor labor conditions. Maybe you didn't know of them before. But the truth of the matter is that this is not just Apple's problem. This is Dell's problem. This is Microsoft's problem. This is HP's problem, Amazon, Walmart, and more. The Sweat-Free Commission paper from 2012 reported that Nike admitted that 50% of its Asian factories restrict access to toilets and drinking water. When House Representative Cheryl Brown argued for the same act that I'm arguing here today, in 2006, he said, "We all know that American workers can compete in a global economy on a level playing field, but no one can compete with prison labor, child labor, sweatshop labor. The result? An increasing number of U.S. manufacturing jobs lost to China. Sweatshop imports are economic suicide for our country." And so that's why Congress should pass this act. Because if Congress passes this act, we won't have to leave this problem up to factory by factory, or country by country, or company by company to deal with this problem. We won't have to hopefully say that Apple will stop importing its iPhones and other innovative products. This will level the playing field and ensure that all U.S. companies have to uphold fair labor practices at the same time. So, to conclude, I'd like you all to picture an Apple store here in the U.S. I think we've all seen one. See the workers, their blue shirts, smiling, ready to help you with your next laptop problem. And now I'd like you to focus and think about all the workers that we don't see, that are actually the majority. They're the ones working under locked doors in China, across the world, under grueling conditions. They're miserable. They're suicidal. They see no way out. If Congress passes this act, we will ensure that Apple, as well as all other American corporations, uphold fair labor practices for them. Apple has deceived us. Their shiny white products and transparent store walls are dirty, with harsh working conditions and suicides like Sunday Young's. Let's pass this act and restore the trust that we should have in our great American businesses. Let's pass this act and start caring about our workers as much as we care about our products.